The grand ballroom of the Hamilton Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers, each light reflecting off polished marble floors like scattered stars. The air was filled with soft jazz music, the sound of expensive laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses belonging to the city's elite. White marble columns lined the hall, and along them stood men and women in designer suits and luxury dresses, all pretending to belong to a world where power was measured in silence and status. At the center of this world stood a man no one truly noticed at first. He wore a simple black tailored suit, not flashy, not loud, but perfectly fitted. His presence didn't demand attention, yet it subtly pulled it. A black man in his early 30s, calm expression, deep observant eyes, standing near the edge of the crowd as if he was watching everything without needing to participate. His name was Daniel Carter, but no one in this room knew what that name truly meant. To them, he was just another guest. To the financial world outside these walls, he was something entirely different. A silent controller of deals, a strategist behind billion-dollar movements, a man whose approval could decide the rise or collapse of companies that most people only read about. Tonight, however, he was not here as power. He was here as observation. Across the hall, laughter erupted near the VIP section. A group of wealthy guests surrounded a young white woman in a red designer dress. She was confident, loud, and clearly used to being the center of attention. Her name was Vanessa Hale, daughter of a powerful investment family tied to international corporate funding. She held a glass of red wine in her hand, spinning it slightly as she spoke to her friends. "Honestly," she said with a smirk, "people like him shouldn't even be in rooms like this." Her eyes drifted toward Daniel. He was standing alone near the bar, untouched glass of water in hand. One of her friends chuckled. "You mean the quiet guy? He doesn't even look like he belongs here." Vanessa tilted her head, watching him with mild irritation, as if his silence offended her more than words ever could. "He's been standing there all evening," she said, "like he owns the place." Her friends laughed again. Daniel heard everything, but he didn't react. Not because he didn't understand, but because he understood too well. Power doesn't respond to noise, it waits. A waiter passed by Vanessa, accidentally brushing slightly too close. A small splash of red wine shifted in her glass. Her mood snapped instantly. "Be careful," she snapped, then stepped forward angrily. But in that same moment, her attention shifted again, back to Daniel. Something about his calmness irritated her even more, like he didn't belong in her emotional world, like he was above it. Without trying, she walked toward him slowly, each step louder than the music in her mind. The crowd nearby barely noticed at first, still laughing, still drinking, still lost in luxury. Daniel finally turned slightly. His eyes met hers, calm, steady, unshaken. For a brief second, something flickered in Vanessa's expression. Not respect, not fear, but annoyance at how unaffected he was. "You've been standing here all night," she said coldly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He simply observed her, not her beauty, not her wealth, but her energy. Impulsive, emotional, used to control without consequence. Finally, he spoke. "I'm here for the deal review," he said calmly. Vanessa frowned slightly. "The deal," she repeated. Before he could continue, laughter from her friends echoed again behind her. "Deal review?" One of them mocked. Who led him into corporate discussions? That was the moment something inside Vanessa shifted. Not logic, not understanding, but pride. Humiliation disguised as confidence. She turned her head slightly toward her friends, then back at Daniel. "You think you matter in any deal here?" she said sharply. Daniel didn't respond. That silence irritated her more. The music faded slightly in her perception. The crowd blurred. All she saw was him standing calmly, like nothing around him had authority over him. Her hand tightened around the wine glass. A second passed, then another, and in a sudden emotional impulse she couldn't control, she stepped forward and threw the wine directly onto his chest. Red liquid spread across his black suit instantly. The room nearby froze for half a second. Laughter stopped mid-air. Glasses paused in motion. Even the music felt distant. Vanessa stood there, breathing slightly faster, expecting shock, reaction, humiliation, anything. But Daniel Carter didn't move, not immediately. He slowly looked down at the stain on his suit, then back at her. Still calm, still unreadable. The silence that followed was heavier than the entire ballroom combined, and what nobody in that room knew was that the man standing in front of them was not a guest in their world. He was the reason their world functioned at all. And the deal Vanessa just insulted was worth $500 million and controlled entirely by him. The moment the red wine spread across Daniel Carter's black suit, the entire atmosphere inside the ballroom changed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was immediate. A silence fell so heavy it almost felt physical, like the air itself had stopped moving. Vanessa still stood there, glass frozen in her hand, expecting a reaction, a step back, a raised voice, something, anything, that would confirm he was just another man she could dismiss. But Daniel didn't give her that. He simply looked at the stain on his suit for a few seconds, then slowly lifted his eyes back to her. Calm, measured, unreadable. Behind him, the crowd began to react in whispers. Did she just throw wine on him? Who is that guy? He must have said something wrong, but none of them knew the truth. Daniel Carter was not a guest in this room. He was the invisible axis around which rooms like this existed. Vanessa finally broke the silence, her voice sharper now, trying to recover control. "You should watch where you stand," she said coldly. "People like you don't just stand in my way at events like this." A few of her friends laughed awkwardly, trying to support her confidence, but Daniel still didn't react emotionally. Instead, he reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a handkerchief. He wiped the wine off his sleeve with calm precision, like the situation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in a long day. That calmness irritated Vanessa more than anger ever could. "You're not even going to say anything?" she snapped. "Do you know who I am?" Daniel paused for a second, then finally spoke. Yes. One word. Simple. Controlled. That single word made her hesitate for a fraction of a second, but pride quickly replaced doubt. She lifted her chin. "Good. Then you understand your place. That was the mistake. Not the wine, not the insult, that sentence." Because Daniel Carter didn't move. But somewhere in the distance of the ballroom, something shifted. At the far end of the hall, a man in a dark suit stepped aside quickly and picked up his phone. His expression changed the moment he saw Daniel. His voice dropped low. "Sir?" A pause, then panic. "I think there's a situation here." Back near the center of the ballroom, Vanessa's friends were still laughing quietly, unaware that something had just started unfolding beyond their perception. Daniel finally took a step forward, not toward Vanessa, but slightly to the side, as if he was no longer interested in the confrontation. That subtle movement made Vanessa feel something she didn't expect. Not victory, not satisfaction, but uncertainty. "Hey," she called after him, irritated now. "I'm talking to you." Daniel stopped, but didn't turn fully. He spoke without raising his voice. "You don't know what you've interrupted." The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was factual. That difference changed everything. A nearby executive, overhearing the exchange, suddenly stiffened. His glass lowered slowly. "Wait," he whispered. "Is that Daniel Carter?" The name didn't land immediately for most people, but for a few in the financial sector circles present in the room, it hit like a shockwave. Whispers started again. "Daniel Carter? The Carter? The 500M partnership approval guy?" Vanessa frowned slightly, sensing a shift but not understanding it. "What are they talking about?" she muttered. One of her friends leaned closer, suddenly unsure. I think he's connected to the Hayes Global deal." At that exact moment, Daniel finally turned slightly toward the crowd. Not to Vanessa, but beyond her, as if she wasn't the problem anymore. And then, quietly, his phone vibrated once, A message lit the screen. Urgent. The 500M deal confirmation is pending your final approval. The crowd around him didn't see it, but Vanessa saw his expression change for the first time. Not anger, not shock, but recognition of timing. And suddenly, the entire dynamic of the room shifted without a single loud word being spoken. Vanessa's confidence started to crack slightly, because she was beginning to realize the man she just humiliated was not reacting like someone beneath her. He was reacting like someone above everything in the room, and that realization was only the beginning of her downfall. The moment Daniel Carter's phone lit up with that message, the entire energy of the ballroom shifted again, but this time it was subtle, almost invisible, but dangerous. Urgent. The 500M deal confirmation is pending your final approval. Daniel didn't react immediately. He simply stared at the screen for a brief second, longer than normal. That silence, his silence, was not confusion. It was decision-making. Vanessa, still standing a few steps away, noticed his expression change, not emotionally, but structurally. Like something inside the situation had just been reorganized. She crossed her arms. "You look like you're finally realizing something," she said, trying to regain control of the moment. Her friends stood behind her, whispering nervously now. The earlier laughter had disappeared completely. Daniel slowly put his phone away. Then he turned slightly toward her. For the first time that night, his full attention was on Vanessa, and it felt heavier than anything she had experienced before. "You think this was just a party incident?" he said calmly. Vanessa scoffed. "It is. You were standing in my space. I corrected it." A few nearby guests exchanged uneasy glances. Corrected. That word felt wrong now. Daniel took one step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just forward. And suddenly, the people around them instinctively gave him space without even realizing why. He continued, "You didn't correct anything. Pause. You interrupted a financial decision that affects your entire family structure." That sentence hit differently. Vanessa blinked. "What are you talking about?" Behind her, one of the executives at the party had gone completely still. His hand was halfway raised with a phone in it, as if frozen mid-call. Another man whispered urgently, "That's him. That's Daniel Carter. He's the final authority on the Hayes Global Veller merger." The name Hayes Global finally registered in Vanessa's mind. Her father's company, her family's deal, a $500 million international partnership they had been celebrating all week. Her confidence cracked slightly, but she covered it quickly. "You're trying to intimidate me now," she said, forcing a laugh. "By pretending you matter in corporate deals?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her the way someone looks at a closed door they already have the key to. Then he said quietly, "I don't pretend." A pause. "I decide." That single sentence changed the temperature of the room, not loudly, not visibly, but financially. Because in the back of the ballroom, 3 executives were now rapidly checking their phones. One of them went pale. The approval system just flagged a lock status change. Another one whispered, "That's impossible unless..." He stopped mid-sentence, because he already knew the answer. Daniel Carter wasn't a participant in the deal. He was the final gate, the one signature, the one approval, the one refusal that controlled everything. Vanessa's voice lowered slightly now. "You're lying," but it didn't sound confident anymore. Daniel looked at her calmly. "No," he said. "You were just never told who signs the final page." A beat of silence. Then, from across the ballroom, a man in a senior executive role walked quickly toward them. His face was pale, his posture broken by urgency. "Sir Carter," he said quickly, almost breathless. "We need confirmation regarding the 500M authorization. There appears to be confusion internally." That sentence landed like a bomb. "Sir Carter." Vanessa froze. Her mind struggled to connect everything. The wine, the insult, the calm reaction, the phone message, the executives panicking. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the executive. "You proceeded without informing them of my presence?" he asked quietly. The executive swallowed hard. "We assumed you would remain anonymous at the event, sir." Daniel nodded slightly. That was enough. No anger, no escalation, just acknowledgement. And that was worse, because now Vanessa realized something terrifying. He hadn't been hiding. He had been observing, and she had just publicly disrespected the one person her entire family's financial future depended on. Her voice softened for the first time. She took a small step back. "You're not," but she couldn't even finish the sentence properly, because the truth was already arriving faster than her denial. Daniel Carter looked at her directly again, and this time his voice carried no emotion at all, just consequence. "You threw wine on me," he said calmly. A pause. "And now you understand what that cost." The ballroom was completely silent now. No music, no laughter, no movement, only realization spreading across faces like ink in water. Vanessa's friends were no longer behind her. They had stepped back, quietly, distance forming naturally, because nobody wanted to stand too close to the moment that was about to collapse. Daniel turned slightly away again, not because the situation was over, but because, for him, it already was. And that's when Vanessa finally whispered, "What did I do?" But by then, the system had already started reacting. The silence inside the ballroom was no longer normal. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows music. It was the kind that follows realization, a realization that something irreversible has just begun. Vanessa stood frozen in place, her fingers slightly trembling now. For the first time since the night began, her confidence wasn't leading her anymore. Confusion was. Daniel Carter stood a few feet away from her, calm as ever, his suit still carrying faint traces of red wine that no one dared comment on anymore. Not because it wasn't visible, but because it suddenly felt irrelevant. Across the ballroom, the executive who had rushed earlier was now speaking urgently into his phone. His voice was low, panicked. "Yes, I'm telling you, he is here. Daniel Carter is physically present at the event. No, you don't understand. He just received the system alert." A pause. His face drained of color. "Yes, the 500M approval structure is now on hold." That sentence rippled through unseen channels like a shockwave, because in corporate language, on hold did not mean delay, it meant uncertainty. And uncertainty in a 500M deal meant collapse was already beginning. Vanessa slowly turned her head toward him. "What is he talking about?" she whispered. But no one answered her, because the people who understood were now too busy reacting. Daniel finally took a slow step forward again, not toward Vanessa, but toward the center of the ballroom. Every person instinctively created space, not because he demanded it, but because the room itself had reclassified him, from guest to authority. He stopped near the central bar table, picked up a napkin slowly, wiped his hand where wine had touched him earlier, then spoke without raising his voice. "This deal was structured across 3 entities," he said calmly, "and 2 of them just received a status freeze notification." One of the executives near him almost dropped his glass. Vanessa's breathing tightened slightly, because she didn't understand the technical details, but she understood tone. And his tone wasn't emotional, it was operational, like someone reading out a system already in motion. She stepped forward slightly. "No," she said quickly, trying to regain control again. "This is a misunderstanding. My father's company would never be dependent on—" She stopped, because Daniel looked at her, just looked, and that silence interrupted her sentence more effectively than any words could. He spoke again. "You think your father's company operates independently." A pause. "It doesn't." That sentence landed harder than anything before it. Vanessa's face changed slightly now. Not anger, not confidence, but something closer to fear trying to disguise itself as denial. "My father will fix this," she said quickly. "He has connections. He can call." Daniel interrupted calmly. "He already did." That made her stop completely. From across the ballroom, a staff member rushed toward the executive cluster holding a tablet. "Sir," he said urgently. We've received confirmation from headquarters. The approval authority has been temporarily reassigned pending review. The executive holding the phone looked like he had just been hit by reality. Reassigned, he repeated slowly. That's not possible without... He stopped, because he already knew without finishing. Only one person could do that. Daniel Carter. Vanessa took a small step back. No, she whispered. Her voice was quieter now, not because she was calmer, but because she was losing volume over reality. Daniel turned slightly again toward her. And for the first time that night, his voice carried something heavier. Finality. When you threw wine on me, he said slowly, you didn't insult a guest. A pause. You disrupted the final authority layer of a 500M deal your family depends on. The ballroom felt smaller now. People weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing collapse in real time. Vanessa shook her head slightly. This isn't happening. But her words had no foundation anymore, because behind her, another executive was already on a call. Yes, cancel the press announcement. No, I don't care what the schedule says. Everything is paused. Another voice from a different corner. We need legal clarification immediately. Another. Do not proceed with public statements. The entire system was reacting now, and Vanessa was watching it happen without being able to stop it. Her voice finally cracked slightly. Why, she said, turning back to Daniel. Why would you do this over something so small? That question hung in the air, and for the first time, Daniel didn't immediately respond. He simply looked at her, long enough for her to understand the answer wasn't emotional. It was structural. Finally, he spoke. Because you thought consequences only apply to people you don't recognize. Silence again. But this silence was different. It wasn't shock anymore. It was acceptance spreading slowly through the room, the realization that status had just been inverted. The man she humiliated wasn't reacting. He was executing outcome. From the far end of the ballroom, doors opened again. Two senior legal advisors entered quickly. Their expressions were serious. One of them immediately scanned the room, then locked eyes on Daniel. He lowered his voice. Sir Carter, we've contained internal escalation, but the public disclosure risk is increasing. Vanessa heard that, and that word hit her harder than anything before. Public, disclosure, risk. She turned slightly toward the crowd. People weren't laughing anymore. They weren't whispering casually. They were watching her, watching the girl who threw wine at the man controlling the $500 agreement. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa Hale felt something she had never experienced in this room before. Not embarrassment, not anger, but irreversible exposure. She looked back at Daniel, her voice now barely stable. What happens now? Daniel adjusted his cuff calmly, then answered in one line. Now, the deal decides its outcome. And in that moment, the ballroom stopped being a party and became a boardroom where consequences were finally speaking. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom without a judge and a business empire without stability. Vanessa stood in the center of it all, her red dress now feeling heavier than it did an hour ago. The confidence she walked in with had completely dissolved. Around her, the elite guests no longer looked amused or curious. They looked concerned, because money doesn't panic easily, but systems do. And right now, the system behind the $500 million deal was shaking. At the far side of the ballroom, Daniel Carter stood calmly, as if nothing had changed. His suit still carried faint wine stains, but even that detail now felt meaningless compared to what was unfolding around him. Executives moved quickly in the background, phones pressed to ears, urgent whispers, security stepping slightly closer but unsure of their authority. One senior legal advisor rushed forward, breathing heavily. "Sir Carter," he said quickly, lowering his voice, "we've confirmed the freeze from headquarters. The board is demanding clarification. They want immediate confirmation of your position." Daniel didn't look surprised. He didn't look stressed. He simply nodded once. "I'm aware," he said calmly. That single sentence changed everything again. because it confirmed something the room was slowly realizing. He wasn't reacting to events, he was controlling them. Vanessa slowly turned toward him. Her voice was smaller now. "What did you do?" she asked. Not angrily, not confidently, but like someone realizing the ground under her feet was no longer stable. Daniel finally looked directly at her, and this time there was no ambiguity. "You assumed influence comes from visibility," he said calmly. "But real authority doesn't need to be seen to operate." Silence hit again, this time heavier, because people understood. The executives understood. The lawyers understood. Even the guests who didn't know the full deal understood enough now to feel uncomfortable. From the side of the ballroom, a phone rang loudly. A senior executive answered it immediately. His face went pale within seconds. "Yes, I understand," he said slowly. Pause, then quietly. "They've escalated it to full review." That phrase spread through the group like electricity. Full review meant everything was now at risk. The 500M agreement, the partnership, the entire structure Vanessa's family had built their confidence on. Vanessa took a small step forward. Her voice cracked slightly. "My father will fix this," she said again, but weaker now. "He always fixes things." Daniel's expression didn't change. "But he didn't sign the final authorization layer," he replied. That line landed differently, because now it wasn't theory, it was fact. Behind Vanessa, another guest whispered, "I think he's the final sign-off authority." Another replied, "No, that level doesn't even report publicly." And that's when it fully hit her. Vanessa turned slowly back toward Daniel. Her lips parted slightly. "You're the final approval," she said quietly. Not a question, a realization. Daniel didn't deny it. He simply adjusted his cuff again and nodded. Yes, that one word collapsed the illusion she had been living inside. Her breath slowed, her confidence disappeared completely now. Because suddenly the wine incident wasn't just disrespect. It was financial sabotage against the most important invisible person in the entire deal structure. Her voice dropped. "I didn't know." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then replied calmly, "That was the problem." A pause. Not angry, not emotional, just final. At that moment, the ballroom doors opened again, this time forcefully. A middle-aged man entered quickly. Expensive suit, panicked expression. His eyes immediately locked onto Vanessa. It was her father, Mr. Hale. And he looked like a man who had just realized something had gone terribly wrong faster than he could control. He rushed forward. "Vanessa," he said sharply, then stopped when he saw Daniel. His entire expression changed instantly. Recognition, shock, then fear. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, lowering his voice completely. The room went silent again, because now the highest authority in Vanessa's life was standing in front of the highest authority in her financial world, and he looked like he had just lost control of both. Vanessa looked between them. "Dad?" she whispered. Mr. Hale didn't answer immediately, because he was reading the situation and realizing it was worse than anything he had been told. Daniel finally spoke. Calm, controlled, direct. "Your daughter interrupted a live approval environment," he said. Mr. Hale swallowed hard. "I understand," he replied quickly. "We can resolve this. It was a misunderstanding," Daniel interrupted gently. "It wasn't." Silence again. Final silence. Vanessa's father turned slightly toward her, and for the first time in her life, she saw something she had never seen in him before. Not anger, not disappointment, but panic. Because he understood something she didn't yet fully grasp. This wasn't a negotiation. This was dependency. Daniel stepped slightly closer now. Not aggressive, just present. "You built expectations around access you don't control," he said. A pause. "And today you acted without understanding who holds it." Vanessa's eyes filled with realization slowly. Not tears yet, just understanding. Her voice barely came out. "So what happens now?" Daniel looked around the ballroom one final time, at the executives, at the lawyers, at the frozen guests, then back at her, and answered simply, "Now you learn what consequences look like when authority is ignored." A long silence followed. No one moved. No one spoke. Because everyone understood, the deal wasn't just at risk anymore. It was already being rewritten in real time. Daniel turned slightly away, signaling the end of the interaction. But before leaving the center of the ballroom, he paused one final time and said quietly, "Next time you see someone standing alone in a room like this, don't assume they're beneath it." Then he walked forward, and the entire room instinctively cleared a path for him. Not because he asked, but because they finally understood. He was never the guest. He was the structure holding the room together, and Vanessa stood still in the center, watching the consequences of one impulsive action rewrite her entire future.